Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, the last Metroid game has been sorted. The galaxy is at peace. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going great. Patrick, can I be vulnerable with you for a second?
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about Metroid, the series, this episode, which means we'll be...
If you're worried that I'm going to freeze you with a beam and then shatter you with a missile, I'm just going to tell you not to worry about that.
Okay, all right. It did cross my mind.
If that
It did cross my
the
mind.
vulnerability
Yeah,
that you
that
were
was
worried about. That was it.
Yes. Exactly. That's what, well, we've cleared that up, so I think we can move forward.
No, what were you going to say?
Well, okay, so we're in doing this exercise, we're going to be talking a lot about the main character of the series, Samus Aran, who is a bounty hunter canonically.
Yes.
We've never seen her bounty hunt, right?
Ooh, I mean, maybe in Metroid Prime Hunters, right? There are other hunters that she's like out there fighting. Like that, you could presume that that is her bounty hunting, right?
Okay.
But like in the traditional like Boba Fett kind of sense.
Well, I mean, is Boba Fett what is
yeah,
the
Boba Fett for sure is a bounty hunter.
What's the difference between a bounty hunter and a hired killer?
Well, okay, so a hired killer is hired to kill someone.
Okay.
A bounty hunter, in the sense that we're talking about now, and not like, you know, Dog the Bounty Hunter or what like an actual like bail bondsman does, is just like going out and finding criminals to bring them back.
Okay.
So that they can at some point pay their debt, right? Because like a bounty hunter, like it collects the bounty because like in the real world, because
somebody skipped their bail. Somebody
posted bail, and you know, with this company, and then they're going to collect them and then get the money for the bail back. And so you even pay someone to do that. But yeah, I don't know like what system of law Samus is upholding.
Because we know that she's buddy with the Federation.
She was buddy with the Federation, yeah.
Well, even now she still like does stuff for them.
She's kind of on the run.
Even after being, well, I guess you're right. Now,
yes,
she's on the run. But for the longest time, even after like leaving the Federation,
yeah,
she was always, I guess, maybe taking bounties from the Federation.
Well, but I mean, like, okay, so just to bring back the Boba Fett comp here, right? He works with the Empire.
Yeah.
So, and this is the evil government that took over, destroyed his home. Right, his the planet of Camino, and that city, whose name I can't remember. They blew it up. You watching Bad Batch? It's real good, Mark.
But Boba Fett is like an anti-hero.
Yes.
So it makes sense for him to be working with the Empire,
right?
But Samus, I guess what I'm getting at, is no, we haven't really seen Samus as I mean another example.
Sure.
Look, it's a cool job to give a fictional character
because
like Captain Falcon, also a bounty hunter,
right? But like,
who is also a like F-Zero racer.
Yeah, well, you know, you just got to feel those like incredible thrills of
he's
going
an adrenaline junkie.
500 miles an hour.
Okay,
it's something like that, right? How fast is the car? They go like an insanely fast speed.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about F-Zero today.
No.
We're talking about Metroid. But before we do that, if you would like to support us, you can go on to over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Nintendo Cartridge Society, where if you support us at the 8-bit or 16-bit levels, you can get access to our once-a-month episodes of mini-series that we are putting out. We are currently making our way through NCS Arcade.
That's right, where we are playing games that are available on Nintendo Switch Online and Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pack that Patrick and I have never beaten before. And we are getting ready to record an episode in the next couple of weeks about Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm going to be playing using my Sega Genesis controller.
Yeah.
I'm very excited.
Pretty cool. And I said that maybe I'd play with my Nintendo 64 controller, but I'm not gonna do
He's
that.
not
I'm just
gonna
gonna
do
play with
that.
my Joy-Con.
Yeah, for whatever reason, not for whatever reason, it's because I don't use them. But it's amazing to me how every single time I want to use one of those controllers, one of the classic controllers, I need to charge it first.
Oh,
They
yeah.
just nothing really holds a charge when you put it in a drawer for 6 months and forget it exists.
Yep.
If you would like to join our Discord, all you gotta do is email us at Nintendo Cartridge Society
At
gmail.com,
gmail.com.
and we will send you an invitation. You can get in there, talk about Nintendo, talk about the show, talk about whatever you like. And you know what? This is what we're about to embark on here is a subjective exercise, and one that I feel almost a little bit more lost than normal. So get in the Discord. We are going to need your input as we move forward here. Mark, let's get to it. Let's sort the Metroid games into their greatest hits and on down. So the premise of this thing, right? We did this last year with the Mario series and with the Zelda series, and sort of our general thinking is that a lot of people are being introduced to Nintendo franchises for the first time on the Nintendo Switch, whether it's their first gaming system or like the first one back in a long time or whatever. There are great examples of Mario and Zelda games available on Switch. The new games, right, are sort of like the greatest hits of these series and are like the best-selling entries to boot.
Yeah.
And so we are now applying that same logic to Metroid.
That's right. And so what we're going to do is we're just like Patrick was saying, by definition, we are just going to say that the games that are available like on Nintendo Switch, not as part of Nintendo Switch Online,
Right.
but like new Nintendo Switch releases, those are just going to be the de facto greatest hits, because our assumption is that the majority of people who are picking up a Metroid game for the first time are going to pick up the one that was most recently released on Switch.
Right. And that's like the sort of analog for a greatest hit. That's a song you hear on the radio, right? And so that is what then makes you go, oh, I should get into Third Eye Blind, right? Is you like that one song.
But so where do you go from there?
Right.
And so Patrick and I have, I guess, the benefit of being around for a very long time.
We're old.
And so,
men.
so, we have existed as long as the Metroid franchise has existed.
And then some.
And so we are going to be acting as like a Sherpa through the Metroid series. Our subjective takes on it.
Yes, but I think also like approaching that part of it with a little bit of humility to be like, yes, we have affection for some of the older, less accessible games in the franchise, but what we're trying to do is map out what are essential games to play if you're a fan of the greatest hits, what your next steps would be if you are interested in those essentials, and what games get sort of relegated to the deep cuts, which is to say, really only if you're crazy about everything else you've played and you need more.
Yes, and that doesn't mean they're bad.
Does not mean they're bad.
It just means
I think
that
we're
going to
be putting some
cuts.
excellent games in the deep cuts.
I think so too.
And then there are also probably some bad games in the deep cuts as well. But so, okay, just to call out those that we are considering the greatest hits for the purposes of this conversation, they are, of course, the games that were released on Switch. Therefore, we are talking about Metroid Dread and the Metroid Prime Remaster.
Yes.
So let's grab both of those off of I made little printouts of all of the game art. These two are going to serve as our greatest hits. If people liked Dread and Prime, or Dread or Prime, I guess.
Yeah.
This should maybe be 2 of these episodes. It's one. We're doing it all together.
It's one episode.
And so that we're going to then determine like where we put the rest of these games. Should we just run down what the rest of the series is?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is the original NES Metroid.
There's the Game Boy Metroid 2.
Return of Samus. And then there is the Super NES Super Metroid.
The Game Boy Advance Metroid Fusion.
And also on Game Boy Advance, we've got Metroid Zero Mission, a remake of the original Metroid. Yep. Where you want to go next?
Oh, well yeah, let's just go down the line with the DS games.
So then there's Metroid Prime Hunters.
And Metroid Prime Pinball.
And then just to fill out the 3DS, we had Metroid Prime Federation Force.
And then Metroid Samus Returns, which is a remake of the Game Boy Metroid 2.
Yes, Return of Samus. Samus Returns is the remake of Samus Returns. Makes me think that they should do a remake of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link and call it Zelda 2: Link's Adventure.
Yes.
Just a little side thing there. And then on the GameCube, we've got Metroid Prime.
Metroid Prime 2 Echoes.
And then on the Wii, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption.
And then Metroid Prime Trilogy.
Which we are counting as a separate entry here, even though it contains the 3 previous games we just mentioned. They all have the motion controls of Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Feels like enough of a change, and the fact that they're all like in a single package, that's a separate thing.
And then finally, also on the Wii, Metroid Other M.
Yes.
Just kind of it's doing its own thing.
Kind of part of its own series, sandwiched between. Wait, where does that take place? Between 3 and 4? Between
canonically?
Super? Yeah. I think it's because the Prime games take place between 1 and 2.
Okay.
And then 2 leads like directly into 3.
Yeah.
So I think after 3 is Other M and then Fusion.
And then Dread.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we don't know, and that's also now what we're here to determine. But so, how would you like to approach this? You want to try to kind of approach this like chronologically, or like by platform, which is a way of doing it chronologically, or is there anything that jumps out to you immediately as like, here is an obvious essential, or even like an obvious deep cut?
Yeah, maybe we go through by just kind of like the order that we named them.
Sure.
And tried to sort it that way.
I also I think we should discuss the original Metroid and Zero Mission in the same breath, just in the same way that we should discuss Metroid 2: The Return of Samus and Samus Returns in the same breath. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Because they're both like retellings of the same story with the same similar gameplay.
Yeah.
And in both cases, I think we both agree that the remakes are far superior to the originals.
Yeah, I think so.
And are just way more accessible to play, not necessarily in terms of like to get your hands on.
Mm-hmm.
But so just the original Metroid. I'm always sort of flabbergasted by the franchise that comes out of the original Metroid. It's such an NES game. It feels like an NES game. It is just sort of like nestled comfortably into the limitations of the NES. And is a game that, without using like passwords to get me to the end of the game with all of the power-ups, I've never like beaten, honestly.
Yeah, this is honestly one we could do for NCS. I've never beaten the original Metroid.
That's a great point. We could do this for NCS Arcade.
I don't like playing the original Metroid.
Then let's not do it for NCS Arcade.
I don't think it's a fun game. I think it's a fun concept.
Yes.
That they really delivered on in Super Metroid.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of this game. I think it's impenetrable to play now, just going in cold. And I wouldn't recommend it. I would not recommend that somebody. To me, this is a deep cut. The original Metroid is a deep cut.
Yes, I will agree with that. And it's a deep cut for a couple of reasons, right? One is that the game has no map. If you want to, plot where you are on the surface of this planet, you need to get out a notebook and a pencil and just write it down. There's also no, and I guess if you're playing it now, you're playing it on like NSO or something, so there are save states, but there's no saving in this game. It's a password save feature, which means that if you do want to like save honestly, again, you got to get out that notebook and a pencil. But okay, so it's impenetrable in that way, but it's also just the controls are like really wonky. Samus moves strangely. I love this series. I also have like a really hard time with the original Metroid.
Yeah, it would be difficult for me to somebody play Dread and
Yeah.
we're like, oh, I really love Dread. What's another Metroid game I should play?
Right.
It's hard to argue that the original NES Metroid is that game.
Right. And if someone was like, I really like Metroid Prime Remastered, you'd be like, here's a foreign language I'm speaking to you. It has nothing to do with the game you like.
Right.
Also, by comparison, Zero Mission is sort of a banger.
Zero Mission is up there for my favorite Metroid game.
Yes, yes. It is in contention. It is in the conversation. I don't know if it necessarily becomes an essential, but it is very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
So just in the meantime, I'm going to put Metroid down on this chair here. We're going to call that the deep cuts. Mark is also noting it in our show notes. Do you want to try to find a home for Metroid Zero Mission now, or is that because I honestly don't know whether I would advocate for it being an essential or a next step.
Okay, let's come back to it.
Okay. Metroid Return of Samus, Metroid Samus Returns. These are the second game in the series and a remake of the second game in the series. The original is on Game Boy and the remake is on 3DS. And boy, does the Game Boy one, just in the same way that the first game feels like an NES game, it feels like a Game Boy game.
Yeah, and it has that same feeling of, oh, this is a really cool idea. This is really cool that that this exists on the Game Boy academically.
Yes.
But
well, and let's talk about like what the premise of the game is and how it differs from the first game. First game, you're just sort of like exploring a space. You're trying to get to Mother Brain in the end, right? In the second game, you have a certain number of Metroids that are out there that you need to hunt down. Like the whole game is like there's a counter in the lower right corner. Kill this many Metroids, and they sort of like evolve and become different versions of themselves throughout the game. But there's something very.
So is she being paid to kill the Metroids?
I think so.
And so she's not bounty hunting then. She's just an assassin. She's a hired assassin.
Yeah, well, some bounty hunters can collect bounties dead or alive, right?
Okay, but they don't have to pay like guild dues for the assassinations.
Well,
those are like off the clock.
Sure. Well, and this is presuming like a Star Warsy guild of bounty hunters, which we've seen in The Mandalorian, but I don't know if that's like a normal part of like bounty hunting lore. Like, is that part of like all bounty hunters? Do they all have a guild?
Yeah, I guess not, because like Samus is such a lone wolf.
That's right.
I mean, except when she's not.
Except when she's with a team, right? Yeah. But yes, Metroid 2: Return of Samus. Her sprite is so big on the screen, and it feels like the camera is like zoomed in, like right on Samus, and you can't really. It's a tough game to recommend.
Yeah, I feel like the other way of doing it would have been to go Super Mario Land style and have Samus be itty bitty.
Yes,
and just
yeah,
like
that would
flipping
also
all
work.
over the place. But I feel like they did do an interesting job of understanding the challenges or like the limitations or even what people want from like a handheld game and applying that to Metroid.
And I think it does a fun job of evolving the idea of what the Metroids themselves are. I think it is a better game than NES Metroid, but I think they're both deep cuts.
Yeah.
I think they're both hard to recommend to a fan of the series as it exists at present. Metroid 2: Return of Samus going into deep cuts.
Do you want to also wait on Samus Returns?
No, for Samus Returns, I actually want to make the argument that it is an essential game.
Interesting.
And I know it becomes a little bit harder to recommend as an essential game just because of its like you can only play it on 3DS. The 3DS eShop is shut down now, and there's not really any kind of indication that this game will ever go anywhere else. But it is developed by the same team that made Metroid Dread, and it basically feels like what if they made Metroid 2 with the Metroid Dread engine, because that's basically what it is.
I know. And so I
know you liked it less than I did.
Well, but that's not even because again, not an argument of whether I liked it or not, but you're right, I didn't like it as much as you did. To me, the reason why I would not put it necessarily in essentials, but I would put it in next steps, is because it is so much like Metroid Dread. And I think Metroid Dread is just a more refined,
That's
like
interesting,
better
yeah.
version of it. And so I do see the argument that it's like, hey, if you like Metroid Dread, then Metroid Samus Returns is going to be right up your alley because they are very similar. So I completely understand that argument, but it's also like, but you just played a better version of it in Metroid Dread. So do you want that, but
Yeah,
like a less
yes,
good version?
that's true. But it also like it serves to like be a history piece as well as be because it is also like the format of Metroid 2,
Right.
right? Like and I think in a lot of the same ways that like we like Zero Mission both for what it is and the fact that it like, you know, goes back over
Makes the first game
it
playable.
makes the first game playable. Yeah, it transforms. It's a different thing, but it makes the first game playable. But yeah, so I don't I don't know. I feel like either of the two that we're talking about right now, Zero Mission or Samus Returns, could go in Essentials or Next Steps, and I don't really know. We can leave them both
Yeah,
for
let's just
later.
punt on both of them
Okay,
for
great.
now.
Great.
Because I think the next one up, if we're going to talk about
Yep.
Super Metroid,
Yes.
is an easy answer.
Essential.
Yeah.
One of the greatest games ever made. It does have a little for two things, right? One is that the to a modern like control scheme, it's not the most intuitive. When I play Super Metroid, I like contort my hand into a little claw so I can push 3 of the face buttons at the same time. But I do it and I love it. So A, that, B, the watery level Meridia is too confusing for its own good.
Yeah.
It's an easy get lost area.
I hate the feeling of not knowing where I'm supposed to go in video games. One, and then I hate the feeling of like
This is number 2. You said one, and then your fingers did too.
And then the second thing second feeling I really dislike in video games, I hate in video games, is when I know where, like, I'm like, oh, I remember
Yes.
seeing this thing.
Yes.
But I have no idea how to get back there. And that was a lot of my experience playing Super Metroid. Although the most recent time we played it in 2020 when we had our retro month.
Most recent time we played it was after that when we played it for the Super Gamer Boys.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Well, for this show, but
yes.
You're right. Was like it was not that bad. I had remembered it being me getting lost much more than I did when I played it in 2020.
Yeah.
I didn't have that problem as much, but I think it's all like worth it. Like the control scheme and the other pieces. I feel like playing Super Metroid is a little bit like watching John Carpenter's the first Halloween movie.
Yes.
Where you see it as, you know, like as an audience where that movie has been around since the 70s, and so you've seen all the other slasher films, all the other movies in general that have like ripped off or taken inspiration from Halloween, and that's what it's like playing Super Metroid.
Yeah,
in
like, some ways it feels
piece.
Yeah, it feels familiar even if you've never played it before because every other game has just been trying to be Super Metroid.
Yeah, have you played an indie game in
yeah.
the last 20 years?
Right.
Then you have played a game that was inspired by Super Metroid.
Super Metroid is also just like the big sprites are so fun. Like Kraid is enormous, Ridley is huge, Mother Brain becomes this monster that takes up the whole screen. And like the storytelling at the end of the game, I don't know, like the game's presentation for its limited 16-bit Super NES palette is just like impeccable. It's, you know, like you said, it's like the game, it's the Metroid. I don't know that any of the rest of these games, even as the technology gets so much better, tell a more affecting story than the end of Super Metroid.
And just like the environmental storytelling, like there's not dialogue.
Right.
There's not hint boxes to explain what to do or anything like that.
There is spoken language at the beginning.
There is spoken language
of the game, which I evoked here at the beginning of our episode.
But it's like seeing, being at the bottom of a chasm, seeing this little like bird creature.
Yep.
Do something and figuring out, understanding what you're supposed to do. Like,
yeah,
it feels. I've talked about this a lot when we talk about Link to the Past, but I think it's very true for Super Metroid as well. is that I think it's a lot easier to go back to Super Metroid now than it would have been like 15 or 20 years ago, because there are so many indie games
Yeah.
that have been inspired by Super Metroid. Super Metroid doesn't feel old. It doesn't feel out of date. There are aspects of it. You're absolutely right. The control scheme, like all that kind of stuff. Um, but like the visual presentation feels timeless
Yes.
because so many games have been inspired by it.
I also got to say that the like limited sound capabilities of the Super NES, perfectly served by the Super Metroid music. It's just like bleepy bloopy enough, and like evokes just enough of the like orchestral string quality that they can actually sample with the Super NES sound chip. That like it just rules, and it has a very like ethereal, otherworldly quality to it. It's just a great game.
It's just a great game, and like as much as I really enjoyed playing Dread, and as much as I like, Fusion and Zero Mission and the Prime games we haven't even like talked about yet, I don't think it's like the perfect for. And some of it I'm sure is nostalgia for the Super Nintendo,
Yes.
but for me it's kind of like it's the perfect match of technology and
Yes.
like
Yes.
and like the subject matter, like the limitations, like those beeps and bloops and everything were perfectly suited for Super Metroid.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
the Dread does a great job with atmosphere and all of that, but it's just not the same. It's
Yeah,
just not
well,
the same.
right, I mean, and like the music in Dread is one of the strikes that I think the game has against it, where it's just like, with void of those limits, it is sort of just like, well, you can do whatever, and really all it does is like ape Super Metroid,
Yeah.
except with higher quality samples, and you're like, well, that ruins it for whatever reason. So let's put Super Metroid in the essentials category there, and move on to Metroid Fusion. Super Metroid is sort of unofficially Metroid 3. Metroid Fusion is unofficially Metroid 4. It says this on the games when the startup screens pop up, Metroid 4, Metroid Fusion, but it's not in like any of the. It's not on the box, for example. Fusion, super fun game.
Super fun game. All the like complaints that I have about getting lost in Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion's like, don't worry, I got you.
Yeah. Do you want to know exactly where you're headed next? Because I will tell you exactly where you're headed
And I
next.
will only let you go there.
Yes.
Like you
Yes.
like you have to go to this sector,
Yeah.
and you can go nowhere else. And it
with
was
a sort of running commentary by an AI pretending to be Adam Malkovich.
yes.
Is it actually pretending to be Adam Malkovich, or is Samus just like, this thing reminds me of Malkovich?
So she in the beginning of the game, I just played it like a year ago when it was released on Nintendo Switch Online, but I'm pretty sure at the beginning of the game she's like, this is really familiar. Like this
Yes.
really reminds me of Adam Malkovich, like my former commander. And then later in the game it's revealed that it is in fact his consciousness that has been uploaded
Got it.
to
So
the computer
is
system.
that the same as Adam Malkovich, or is he different if he doesn't have biological urges?
Yeah, we don't.
I would argue he's different.
He
He doesn't have to wipe his nose ever.
Does Adam Malkovich AI have a soul?
Great question.
Flood or not Flood?
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
But Flood is also we don't know.
But yeah, so Fusion, I think, is a really fun game.
I agree.
It breaks it up into sectors, so you can only explore one part of a space station at a time. It's very, and then within that sector, there is like a certain amount of discovery and looping and all of that.
Yes.
But it is definitely not to the like degree that Super Metroid has, or even something like Metroid Dread. I really like this game. I would say it's a next step for sure. It's
I will
definitely
agree.
not
Yeah,
essential.
it's a next step. It's a great game, and also like there is the thing about like it was released on the same day as the original Metroid Prime, right? Like they had this thing where they're like, we've got 2 Metroid games, even though there won't be another time that we put out 2 Metroid games within a year of each other ever again, to come out the same day, and they're radically different. So like there is something nice about like pairing it up with Prime Remastered for like a little bit of that throwback synergy to 2002 or whenever that happened. 3, 2, 3 doesn't matter. But I agree, it's a next step for sure.
Yeah. All right, should we skip over the like spin-offs like Hunters and Pinball and Federation Force and
Right.
just talk about the Prime games?
The Prime games. These are the this is the cursed Prime trilogy
Yeah.
that we're not going to talk about
Yeah.
right away. Which means we got to start with a redundant item on our list. Metroid Prime. Does it make any sense to drive anyone towards the original Metroid Prime when remastered exists?
Do we even include it on this list? Because where would it?
It's a great question.
I guess it would fit in deep cuts. Where
Sure.
it's like, hey, you played it on Switch and you want to experience,
and you did all these other things,
and you want to experience the GameCube version.
Yeah.
Hey, go nuts!
Go nuts.
You're a Metroid fiend.
Yeah.
You should experience it on the GameCube.
Yeah, I agree. Deep cuts for the original Metroid Prime. A great game.
A great game. You know, when I replayed it in,
We also have another version of it too. To discuss
right? Yeah.
momentarily.
When I played it for remastered, I had a lot of fun with it for the first half. And
Yes.
then the last half where you have to get every artifact to finish the game.
Yeah.
And you're going back to like the areas where it's dark and you have to use the night vision goggles.
It's a miscalculation for sure.
So that part of it is not aged particularly well, but the first like 10 hours are sublime.
Yeah, absolutely sublime.
The atmosphere in
Mhm.
Prime is so good.
Yes, I
in the
agree.
beginning.
And the music, the limitation of the music on the GameCube, perfectly suited for like a 3D version of Metroid. But I will just say, like, they fixed the controls in the remaster as well, which is not true of the first two games in the series here, which I think make them hard recommends after someone has played Prime
Yes.
remaster.
Yeah.
So okay, and just sort of by default that it's already a game that you've effectively played as a greatest hit. The original Metroid Prime goes in deep cuts, which brings us to Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, a game that I think in basically all ways is a less good game than the original Metroid Prime.
I feel like the Metroid Prime trilogy for me
Gets worse.
is very similar. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yes.
Where each movie gets successively worse. And they're not bad per se. But
Right.
but they do, like they knock it out of the park with the first one and then just gets a little messier as the world expands in like the second and third ones.
Which is also like the expansion of the worlds of Metroid Prime 2 Echoes is its chief sin, right? The fact that there is a light world and a dark world, and you have to navigate through both sort of simultaneously. And when you're in the dark world, if you're not in these like little zones, these little orbs of light, you're taking damage. It's just a bummer to be in the dark world. Plus, it doubles the space that you have to traverse
Yeah.
to like get through anything. Echoes is a tough hang, but I think it is still pretty good, and maybe I mean I think I like it more than Corruption, but I mean I don't really know what to do here.
I don't really know what to do either because
I would love for there to be a remaster of Echoes.
and that's what the rumors said existed. You know, that like remastered was coming and then 2 and 3 were also getting remastered. I don't know that I buy it at this point. But I agree with you. I don't really know. I struggle with what to do with both of these games. I don't like Corruption. I didn't enjoy Corruption that much. But
let's put Echoes on hold for a second and just talk about Corruption and Prime Trilogy, because I have a problem with the pointer controls, the Wii controls. I think it's actually the worst way to play a Metroid Prime game. Again, here's another instance of the original Metroid Prime, this time with widescreen and pointer controls, and I think it's the worst way to play it.
Yeah, for me, Corruption, as it like expanded the scope of the world, like the fictional world, and you're hanging out with all of the Federation soldiers, and it just feels like it lost what made, as the series went on, it just lost what made Metroid Prime, the first game, so special.
I agree.
And just kind of became more and more another generic space shooter in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and there's also like the moments where like Samus is in her ship and like flying it around, and it's all like gimmicky little like you got to do this with a Wii remote and like twist the nunchuck like this, all this kind of stuff where I'm just like, why am I doing this? Like this isn't the core gameplay of Metroid. Why are you making me do these things?
It's kind of the Star Fox problem, right?
Yeah.
Where the first game really like knocked it out of the park, and then the further that they went into the series, the more they, because Nintendo doesn't like to just like repeat itself.
Yeah.
So they kept trying to add something new, but with Metroid Prime, nothing that they added really made the game more enjoyable.
Yeah, when you do a very small thing perfectly, adding more things to it doesn't make it better.
Yeah.
Right? It just takes away from the thing you've done perfectly.
But it feels so like, because this isn't a ranking, we have to decide, how we would recommend somebody who liked remastered to approach these games. It's difficult because I don't know that any of these are essential.
Yeah. I mean, I think I agree. I don't think any of these are essential. And it feels weird to put like one of either Prime or sorry, Corruption or Trilogy in. Like I feel like those have to go in the same space almost. Unless I don't know. I don't know. I'm getting wrapped around my own head here.
Okay. All right. I'm John Q. Public.
Okay.
And I loved Metroid Prime Remastered.
Yeah.
And I am not interested in playing the 2D Metroid game. I just want to play.
Then the next one I recommend is Echoes.
Okay, so I think
that has to be an essential. That's what that means.
Okay.
Right?
I guess so.
I think Metroid Prime 2 Echoes,
yeah,
for all its faults,
yeah,
goes in the essentials.
Okay. It's so crazy to say that Trilogy is like a deep cut.
I mean,
is that where we're headed?
It is kinda, kinda. But are we also putting Corruption in deep cuts? Are they both games that we just like simply don't recommend you play unless you're like stoked about everything else?
I think it's fair to say that Corruption would be a next step. If you liked Metroid Prime 2 Echoes,
yeah,
then the next logical step would be for you to play Corruption.
Now, the entirety of Corruption, exactly as it is in Corruption, is in Metroid Prime Trilogy.
But we're saying the Metroid Prime Trilogy, the first two games are not the optimal way to play that.
Right, but you would have the same game if you picked up both of these packages of Corruption and Prime Trilogy. You have identical versions of Corruption plus other curiosities in the form of motion controls for Prime 1 and 2.
Okay, so I think where we're headed.
I think Prime Trilogy is a next step. And then Corruption is a deep cut.
Okay, this feels insane, but I think this is where logic has led us.
And look, we can't fault logic.
No.
Okay, so Corruption goes down here in deep cuts. The Metroid Prime Trilogy joins Metroid Fusion in the next steps, which already feels that feels crazy to me.
Well, we're
gonna have to like revisit all of this.
Well, I think we can all agree that Metroid Other M is a deep cut. Or can we not?
I mean, okay, Metroid Other M, not a great game. Not even a good game. And what you were saying earlier about like, what was your example of like a perfect Super Metroid is a perfect melding of like the technology and what the game is. And Metroid Other M is sort of like the opposite of that, right? It wants to be like a cinematic storytelling game. The Wii can't do that. And they keep jamming these like the control scheme is.
I don't know that I would blame the Wii for Metroid Other M storytelling faults.
Sure.
Like no console is going to save the writing of Metroid Other M.
Right, or the acting.
Right.
There's a lot of. The thing about it, however, is there's a lot of Adam Malkovich stuff in this game, and there's a lot of Adam Malkovich stuff in Dread.
Yeah, it's so funny how Metroid Other M is so important to the lore.
Yeah, it's wild.
Also, that there is lore like this in the Metroid games, where you're keeping track of like is this AI? Who is Adam Malkovich? Like
Yeah.
you're playing Fusion, and you're like, what?
What? Yes. Where
Who-
did this, huh?
Who is Adam Malkovich?
Right.
And then why is his consciousness uploaded into this computer?
Right.
And then you have Metroid Other M who's like explaining this, and you're like, why? What?
Yes.
There's for a game about a bounty hunter who may or may not be collecting bounties.
But it's
for-
definitely just blasting space jellyfish,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's crazy that there is lore. It does make me realize that there is a sort of Adam Malkovich trilogy within the Metroid games that is Fusion, Other M, Dread.
Yeah.
Which I don't feel good about.
Well, I interrupted you, but I think you did have an interesting point about Metroid Other M just being not a good fit for the console because it wants to do kind of like a 2D side scrolling thing sometimes,
Right.
but then when
also
you're
be like a
shooting-
light gun game sometimes.
Yeah, when you're shooting missiles, you have to use the Wii remote and point it in the screen, and it turns into like first person, and those transitions are really awkward. And then there's like a QuickTime button press events. Like it's such a weird Frankenstein of what was cool in 2010 in gaming.
Yeah.
But it
y-
is
Bad.
so crazy.
Yes. It is so crazy. It has these moments of where you just have to it's like a hidden pixel kind of thing where you just like find the thing you're supposed to be looking at and look at it. Just really atrocious. And I guess like if the exercise is at what point in someone's Metroid journey do you recommend Metroid Other M to them? Maybe it just has to be deep cut.
Or is it a next step where it's like, oh, you've been Metroid pilled? So
this is great. This is a great point.
Like,
because it's not a waste of time.
It's not a waste of time.
It is one of the more curiosities in this. It is the weirdest game on here.
It's an experience.
Yes.
And an experience that you will sit through because the cutscenes are unskippable.
I just like comparing it to what we have in the deep cuts currently, the original Metroid Prime for obvious reasons, Metroids 1 and 2, and Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Yeah, there's just like an element of novelty to Other M that I feel like isn't there in these four other games.
Because it like swings for the fences.
Yes.
And is it a disaster?
Absolutely.
Does it achieve its goals?
No.
I would argue not at all. But it is so
strange.
fascinating.
It is so strange.
Not just as a Metroid game, just like as a game.
Yes.
It is so weird.
As a piece of culture preserved in amber on the Wii, it is one of the stranger things to exist. Mark, you and I frequently make reference to the fact that Adam Malkovich, when he was commanding Samus, would say to her, "You got a problem with that, lady?" And she would stick out her hand and then give a thumbs down. And I'm not really sure what that's supposed to communicate, but it's like a fun little ritual that they have that comes from this game.
Yeah. I think we just have to honor our truth, which is that it's the next step.
All right. There we go. Metroid Other M going in the next steps. Again, if you'd like to join the Discord, email us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com. Which brings us now to the cursed Metroid Prime trilogy. Hunters first. Hunters, Pinball, and Federation Force. Hard to divorce these, or Federation Force in particular, hard to divorce from the moment that it was announced and came out in, where no one wanted anything to do with it, right?
Yeah. It had been radio silence on Metroid games for so long.
Yes.
And then to have it be this like cooperative multiplayer game on the Nintendo 3DS, people were furious.
Yes. That also heavily features like a soccer mode. Do you remember Blast Ball?
I don't. I forgot about Blast Ball.
Blast Ball is part of it. But yeah, I mean, Federation Force feels like the deepest of deep cuts.
Yeah. Like an oddity similar to Other M, but also so different from the other Metroid games.
Yeah, well, and also like, the online gameplay is not available on the 3DS anymore. So if you wanted to even play the game the way you're supposed to play it, you need two other people who have a copy of Federation Force.
Which I'll say, I feel like I feel like we need to do what we did
Yeah, we
for
do.
Triforce Heroes with Federation
We got to
Force.
get Matt Acevedo in here, and we got to play this game.
Yeah, we got to
Here's
play.
the thing: we got to find like 3 copies of. Do you have a copy of this game on your
No,
3DS?
do you know what? It's one that if I had been smarter, I
I-
would have bought
Yeah,
before the 3DS eShop went
I
down.
wonder if I have it. I might.
But I'm sure we can rustle up. I think it's 4 players. I think we could have 4 people
4?
playing Federation Force
Oh my god.
together. But a
Uh,
deep cut for sure.
a deep cut, and look, we're Metroid aficionados in some sense, so we may be interested in it in a deep cut sort of way. I also like Hunters.
Yeah, I mean, I think
they're kind of all hard to recommend.
yeah, I think Hunters and Pinball. Not that they're necessarily. I mean, Hunters.
Hunters is bad.
Yeah, a real oddity. Metroid Prime Pinball, a perfectly fun pinball game.
Let's put it in next steps.
That's Metroid themed. But I think you're right. I think those are all like deep cuts.
Yeah, I mean the Metroid Prime Pinball. Yeah, totally for completionists or for fans of DS pinball games.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, that's gonna go in deep cuts. Let's just talk a little bit about Hunters.
Okay.
Because the demo for Hunters was one of the like showpieces for the Nintendo DS. Here's what this machine is capable of. You can actually run a first-person shooter on a handheld. It was a revolutionary thing to be happening at the time. There's no analog input on the DS outside of the touchscreen, which means you have to use the touchscreen to like look around, and then you move forward and backwards with the buttons, the face buttons, with your right hand.
Well, so it shipped with, or maybe it did ship, or I think it shipped with like a thumb stylus thing. So
Yeah,
like a little, so like
yes.
something that you would that you could put on your thumb, so you could use your thumb to control the direction you were looking with the touch screen.
Right.
And then you would use the D-pad to move directionally.
The D-pad?
Yeah.
So are you moving with the other thumb?
What do you mean?
Yeah, are you looking around with I guess
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is you're
right.
you're using the thumb on the touchscreen to control your
Right.
view.
You're using that with your right hand.
With your right thumb, yes.
Got it.
And then you're using your left hand and the D-pad to like move.
Right. It's the same problem that like obviously Super Mario 64 3D or what's 64 is it just called?
DS.
DS, thank you. Jesus. Or like Kid Icarus.
Yeah, Kid Icarus Uprising also, where it's just like weird control scheme. A really interesting idea. And you're right, they packed in the demo in the US with the original DS for many months because it was a first-person Metroid shooter promised for the Nintendo DS, which was a really cool idea. The game was like delayed, eventually came out, and just by that point the DS was such a different thing than what like the audience wasn't really there for Hunters.
There
it just
wasn't
a great
hardcore.
game.
Yeah. It also had online too, so you could go on and play death matches with people. Another thing, of course, that you can't do anymore. I still hope that when they do put together some sort of collection of Metroid Prime games, that they put the multiplayer modes from Hunters, Federation Forces, and Prime 2 Echoes, which had a deathmatch mode on GameCube. That those would all be like packaged together or salvaged in some way. But this goes in deep cuts for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that leaves us to figure out what to do with Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Samus Returns.
And I think we can say they are both safe from the deep cuts.
Yeah.
Right? And like I'm almost tempted to put them both in essentials. Just because they're both such wonderful recontextualizations of the first 2 games. It means that then you've got like within the essentials, you've got a version of 1, a version of 2, 3, and then I guess we skip 4. 4 is in the next steps, and 5 is Dread. So like you've got, just I don't know. They both feel like essential games to me. And I was making that argument for Samus Returns before, how similar it is to Dread. It is a less good version of Dread, but like that's sort of the nature of moving from greatest hits to essentials.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm good with that. I really love Zero Mission,
Hmm.
and I think um it obviously takes away a lot of the issues with the first game, but then also introduces, like the stuff with Zero Suit Samus.
Yep.
Um
An icon in her own right.
yes. So yeah, I like that. I like having them both in essentials.
Uh, yeah, I think that's the it. I just want to pause at this point to say that it is a damn shame that neither of these games are playable on Switch,
Zero Mission,
especially.
yeah, that feels like a weird omission.
It does feel like a weird omission, a weird Zero omission, because Fusion, another Game Boy Advance game, is there. They just don't want to put out Zero Mission.
I guess not yet. Maybe it's like the Donkey Kong Country of the Game Boy Advance, where
Yes.
they are just waiting for the right moment, and maybe that's Metroid Prime 4 to put Zero Mission on there.
Jesus. Yeah, and then so okay, we're putting Zero Mission in essentials.
Yep.
And then Samus Returns. I still feel strongly that it goes in essentials.
I also I can get on board with that, and I like it because it's essential in the way that it's the rebirth of 2D Metroid.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and is like a blueprint for like how we do it going forward, right? Or at least for the next one, which is all there has been. Do you feel at all weird that we are very 2D heavy on the essentials? That there's only one 3D game in there in the form of Echoes?
I think some of it is just the nature of the series.
Yeah,
That Metroid started as a 2D series, and that's really where its roots are, and really where its heart is. I think Metroid Prime Remastered is an amazing game, and you can make arguments for elements of the other Metroid Prime games being exceptional, but they are a spin-off. It's a spin-off series.
Yeah. I think that is right and just and fair. Okay. Should we recap what we have done, Mark? And then as we're going, we can say like, I don't know, you know what I mean?
Yeah, let's do it.
So let's start in the deep cuts, okay? So in the deep cuts pile, we have Metroid Prime Pinball,
Metroid Prime Hunters,
Metroid Prime Federation Force,
Metroid 3 Corruption, Metroid Prime 3,
Corruption, the original Metroid Prime,
Metroid 2 Return of Samus.
So those are all the deep cuts. Then in our next steps...
Oh, wait, Metroid. Did we say Metroid?
Oh,
the
yeah,
original Metroid.
And Metroid. Yes, that's right.
A lot of deep cuts for the
deep
Metroid
cuts,
series.
yeah. I mean, I do feel like there's a lot of hard to recommend things in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cursed Metroid Prime trilogy is truly a cursed trilogy, like for sure. In the next steps, we've got Metroid Other M,
the Metroid Prime trilogy,
and Metroid Fusion.
Then in Essentials, we have Metroid Samus Returns,
Metroid Zero Mission,
Metroid Prime 2 Echoes,
and Super Metroid. And then the greatest hits are Dread and Prime Remastered. Yeah, I think this is right.
I think this is right.
So I would love to hear other people's reactions to this. Are we valuing the novelty of Other M too high? I don't think we are. Are we valuing it too low? Are we too tough on the Wii controls for the Prime trilogy? Is there some secret wonderful thing about the cursed Prime trilogy that we don't know? I would get in the Discord, let us know. But otherwise, Mark, I think we did it. Let's close this out. That is going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Thank you so much to our 16-bit patrons, Connor McCabe, Patrice Millette, David Hendley, Alias X, and Kyle Seaborn. We appreciate you all very much. We appreciate everyone who listens to the show. Again, get in that Discord. Anthony DeLuca made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Ellers, saying thank you for listening.